I'll introduce, before we have all the cameras, I'll introduce Andrew. Have to say a few words.
Or not.
Thanks, Tony.
My name's Andrew Jakubowicz. I'm the head of the, one of the co-directors of the Cosmopolitan Civil Society's Research Centre at the University of Technology. We're a partner in this whole event with the China Research Centre, Maurizio, new director of which is over there, Maurizio Marinelli, who we'll be seeing more of around Sydney, and CAF with Tony and the crew. I'd just like to say welcome tonight. This is the second part of an all-day event. It began at 9 o'clock this morning with a conference that ran all day at UTS, which explored various sides of the whole issue of Chinese people in Australian politics. Tonight we have got a, I think a sort of Q&A type of thing. We were very grateful to the independents for holding off on their decision so that we have a new government to celebrate this evening's event. I'd like now just to introduce you again to the Chair and Master of Ceremonies for tonight, Stephen Fitzgerald. Stephen.
Is it already up this way? Good. Tony.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Tony. 我首先欢迎和感谢各位来参加今天我们的这个晚会。I'm delighted that there are so many people here, and because I'm sure the room is going to be crowded with questions, I just have a few ground rules that I'd like to spell out in advance. The first is I'd like to give each member of the panel an initial 2 minutes to warm things up, responding to a question which I'll ask them in a minute. After that, by the way, one of our panelists has to leave at about 8:15, unfortunately, so we may not be able to get through all of the panelists and have some Q&A before he leaves, so we may have some of the panelists first and then resume afterwards. And Tony is so devoted to this cause that he's given me his watch. He doesn't know yet whether I may run away with it, but the watch is here to keep time and to keep everyone to a very rigid discipline. When you want to make a comment or ask a question, can I ask you to give your name and any organisation or affiliation that you may have, not just an association or business organisation or university, but if you belong to a media organisation or a political party or a religious body. And I'd ask if you could keep your comments or questions to 2 minutes and address them either to the panel as a whole or to one or more specific members of the panel. Today, as Adrian said, we've had a very full and very stimulating day. We've had 12 speakers and 12 discussants, so we've had ideas from 24 people, and interspersed with all of that has been discussion and question and answers. And many issues have been raised about this question, and there are many to be discussed tonight, but I think there were a couple in particular that came out of a lot of the discussion. One was something like, what's a Chinese anyway? And the other was really talking about access to power or participation in the political process that gives power, the power of decision making. On the first, what's a Chinese anyway? I'd like, if I may, to begin with one anecdote. This is a bit self-indulgent given the time, but it's very relevant to what we're going to discuss. In about 1966, I was walking down Dixon Street, filled with pride in my newly acquired Mandarin, and I was walking with a journalist friend who kept on nudging me and saying, "Go on, Fitzy, speak Chinese, will you?" And we were living in Canberra, and we were actually in search of a bottle of Chinese liquor to take back to Canberra for a special meal we were having. We went into a Chinese store, one of those really traditional, old-fashioned stores that you could find anywhere around, particularly around Southeast Asia, you know, up country in Cambodia or Thailand or places like that, all over Indonesia. And there, sitting behind the counter, is a very old lady. She was somewhere between 90 and 110. And she's sitting behind a very high counter, and I looked over the counter, and she looked up at me, and I could see that her eyes were clouded with cataracts. I knew also, of course, that no one much amongst the Chinese community in Australia spoke Mandarin, and I only spoke Mandarin. I spoke not a word of Cantonese. But my friend is continuing to nudge me. "Go on, Fitzy, ask her, ask her." And in order not to lose face, I said, "我要养平美归路." And she looked at me like that, and I thought, well, you know, I'll give it another go. I said, "我要养平美归路." She thought for a bit and she said, "Don't you speak Australian?" And that taught me two things. What it taught me about her was that she obviously identified very strongly with Australia. Note that she said, "Don't you speak Australian?" She didn't say, "Don't you speak English?" And what it taught me was that you should never, ever make any judgment about a person on the basis of their physical experience. And it was a lesson that I learned early, and I'm glad I learned it then, because it saved me from many horrible mistakes later in my career. So to this other question that we were discussing today, what I broadly described as talking about we could all sing. Talking about access to power and participation, and we also talked about barriers to power. Now, on the advertisement for this seminar, it says that we're going to address the effectiveness of the Chinese politicians in the Australian context, and this will be an opportunity for the community to analyse and critique their involvement and their strategies. And I'm now going to ask panel members to address a question, starting with Jieh-Yung Lo, Councillor Lo from Melbourne, because he's going to have to go. And the question is this: to what extent do you believe Chinese politicians have been effective in participation in politics? And there's a second part to the question. Are the barriers to participation more barriers in political institutions and processes, or are they more from within Chinese communities themselves or individuals? You're first, Jim.
Thank you, Ambassador Fitzgerald. I think I would like to again acknowledge the organisers of this fantastic forum, and also it's great to sort of sit here on the same panel with many of my esteemed colleagues from various different backgrounds and different political parties. It's very rare when you have a Labor man sitting next to a Liberal man having dinner. So it's sort of like it was a really good experience for me. So certainly that's something we need to do a bit more, I think, in terms of cross-party understanding amongst ourselves, and also strengthen our understanding for the community as well. And I said this morning in my speech is that in Victoria, the Greek and the Italian MPs from various political parties, Labor, Green, Independent, Liberal, they actually meet once a month to talk about their respective communities. That's something that we don't do as a community in Victoria. I'm not sure about New South Wales. I'm not qualified to speak on behalf of New South Wales, but in terms of the barriers, I think, and this morning I highlighted a very personal example where you go to a local government conference and you walk up, dressed up in a suit and everything else, and you have a 55-year-old lady come up to you and say, "Can you pass me the sugar, please?" So it's pretty much, that's the highlight of perception for the overall mainstream community of local councillors. Local councillors are, between the ages of 55 and 60, male, white hair, from rural Victoria. That seems to be the general gist of a local councillor, but what they don't really understand is that us as a society, we're changing, and we require our parliamentary representatives, our local government representatives to reflect that particular community as well. And I think, and I acknowledge everyone on this table, as well as everyone out there who's taken an interest in this important subject. The barriers still remain, but it requires not just individuals who are in an elected position, also the community themselves to go out, share stories, tell their friends, that politics is not something where you will get persecuted for being involved in. It is an adequate career path. It is something that, people always say, as a local councillor, why do you get paid by blah, blah, blah to serve the community? Well, we serve the community, but a lot of it's after hours work, so people don't see that. But really, in terms of there are parliamentary political barriers as well as community barriers. In answer to your question, Professor, I think that's what I would say. The parliamentary barriers would be that the lack of understanding of the parliamentary process, that puts people off. People go look at a federal election, they pick up the paper and they read through an article and they say, "No, this is too complicated for me, I don't want to be involved in this." So that's the parliamentary barriers, the lack of understanding of that. And the community barriers, as I mentioned before, is that it is not a career path that gets promoted within the community. My auntie and uncle always complains and say, "Why don't you go do a law degree instead of spending 4 years on council?" It's just, I don't know, because it's, I don't like law and this is not what I want to do. And they go, "Well, go be a lawyer and go make money, blah, blah, blah." I go, "We'll do that anyway." But anyway, this is sort of, that's the perception, the community perception. So I think you've got both barriers from a parliamentary perspective and a community perspective.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask Henson Liang if you would like to venture an answer to that question I posed.
Which question did you say you're going to get a question?
Sorry, well, it's the same question that I want every member of the panel to address, and it's in two parts. The first part is, to what extent do you believe that Chinese politicians have been effective in their participation in politics in Australia? And the second part is, are the barriers to participation, are there more barriers in the political institutions and processes, or more from within Chinese communities themselves or individuals?
Thank you, Professor. First, I would like to say, the way you speak Mandarin better than a lot of us. Even compared to me, we have been maybe in the same level. Yeah, anyway, distinguished guests and friends, all our people, I'm very happy to hear tonight a part of the panel. I'd like to answer your question. In my experience in politics, I start from very bottom. I start in university and then start business and participate in the local community, especially in Ashfield. Like I start to, a lot of people that ask me question, ask me help, communicate with the council. In my business, in my real estate business, a lot of people come through me. That's why I start my political involvement in the local area. I think in Chinese community, a lot of people, the support the leader, not really participate in local branch. For example, like in Ashfield, Burwood, I try to get recruit a lot of members to join Liberal Party. Because in Australia, it's a democratic country, the party nominate the local candidate or the state candidate is really from the local member, but then to support you. I think Chinese community, we don't have a very strong activity involved in the membership local activity. I think that this is very important for in the future for our Chinese community participate in politics in Sydney. Well, that's my second answer question. I think the part of the Chinese culture in Australia, in China or in Australia, like other countries, what you say, what the parents always push children got to university, got high degree, like want to become a doctor, like professor, that kind of to push children. In other area, what Chinese community now very strong. But another thing in the Chinese community, the association, we got a lot of Chinese association in Australia. I think in Sydney we have more than 300. The Chinese association for representing different areas. You got Fujian, Canton, or all of these communities are very focused on their own agenda, own activity. Well, if the community they really participate in mainstream politics, well, they should put more effort, more unit to participate in mainstream politics activity. Well, my last answer, well, is the business community especially Chinese business community in Sydney are very support politics, but it support on the finance support. Finance, especially like I think both parties, some party treat Chinese people like milk and cow. Always we have a big function. Chinese people are really support a lot in the politics, support the party. Or I think the business association in Sydney, China especially, should put more effort, more focus on the candidate for doesn't matter from different background, from Chinese background, to support those people become in politics representing the Chinese community. Thank you very much. That's my answer.
Thank you, Henson. Peter Wong.
Thank you, Professor. You have really asked very difficult questions. To start with, I think it's a perception among the Chinese community, as mentioned earlier speakers, you like your children to be successful, university, be a doctor, be a lawyer, to be an accountant, anything but a politician. Because it's dirty, scandalous, it's egoistic, it's pride, it's infighting. The Chinese can do without. Unfortunately, it's something we must do. And as a result, China community have the perception, as Henson was saying, okay, we support any buggers who want money from us, but don't get us involved. That's the problem. And because there's no willingness, there's no desire to understand politics, there's no Dr. Sun Yat-sen in Australia, and that education in the Chinese community is very important. And secondly, Chinese community, many of them advocate, can be vocal, can advocate, can argue, but come to reality, door knocking and shake people's hands, and taking off your time to to talk to people, study news and read newspaper every day, and many councillors, many members of parliament do not wish to do so. As far as the hindrance, obstacle to be a politician, I have to say both major parties and do not really have a great desire to promote people of ethnic background, not just Chinese, to be in politics. Of the two major parties, let's talk about it. Labour Party, yes, I have to say right now, you can buy your position there by power, by money, by whatever. And we all well known, but however, as a result, it's also easier into the Labour Party. You know the connection, you know the party secretary, you know the premier, you know the numbers man. You can be an MLC for the matter or council easily. In liberal practice real democracy, as a result, for Asians to be of Chinese in particular, to in upper house or in lower house, they're very difficult. If you look at realistic and the forthcoming state election, if the Liberal Party takes the four position, the National Party 4 position, 8 is gone. Because the distribution, you almost be sure those 8 people are anybody but Asian background. And therefore, if number 19, 11, 12, the chances not that is 0, but it's very difficult. But looking at even from the previous, this federal election passed, both major parties have no desire to promote people of ethnic background. I think that's the greatest problem at present time.
Thanks very much, Peter. That's a very interesting observation about our political system, that there is no desire in the major political parties, and in this sense the two-party system works against having more people of other ethnic backgrounds in politics. So maybe having more independence might turn out to be a good thing. I'm now going to ask Wanning Sun for her views on this. Now, she's not a politician or a local councillor, but she has a research interest in many of these issues. Wanning.
Thank you, Steve. I'm the only one on this panel who is not a politician, and it's too late for me to become a politician. Too late in my career to change course.
No. They're recruiting already.
I'll think about that. So I'm not sure whether I've got much to say at all in answer to Steve's question. But as someone who is trained to become an academic, you know, very different species from being a politician. And the question interests me because for the last 15 years I have done research on the anthropology of media, and that's my training. I'm an anthropologist of media. So I'm really interested in how ordinary media consumers make use of media in order to come to their decision making in terms of who to vote. Right, so I'm interested in politics from the point of view of ordinary people in everyday life making decision making, particularly in this crucial moment for the last 3 weeks. And I had the opportunity, as part of doing a bit of research for this presentation, ask half a dozen Chinese people in the West, who did you vote, and how did you vote, and what sort of newspapers did you read, in order to inform yourself of the decision, of the policies of each party in order to come to this decision. And the answers were so diverse and some of them so unpredictable that I was beginning to think, that's probably my next project. And if I put my application soon enough, I might be able to do some field work comes next election. Because I just think it's a fascinating topic from the point of view as an academic looking at the everyday media consumption. So to answer Steve's question, I don't have experience dabbling in politics, but it seems to me, as an outsider, I think that it wouldn't be, you as a politician wouldn't be effective unless and until you can effectively use the media to get your message across, right? And in this when I'm talking about media, I'm talking about both the Chinese language media as well as the so-called mainstream English language media. And it seems to me, and this is something that I was hoping to be able to get to in my presentation, it seems to me that so far, in terms of the Chinese language media in Australia, there hasn't been much coverage in terms of this grassroots political activism across the board in terms of the Chinese involvement. And it seems to me they're too busy translating, literally translating the current stories from Sydney Morning Herald and The Australian. And mainstream Australian newspapers already bad enough as it is, right? It is simplistic, it is binary, it's reductionist. And yet, if you do not put your own interpretation of what it means for the Chinese community and what these policies of each party mean for the Chinese community, you already have lost the battle. So I think there has been a consistent lack of Chinese interpretation of what those election issues mean for the Chinese communities themselves. So I don't really think it's actually done a great service to the consumers, to the readers in that way. And that is really something that I'm interested in. It is a cliche to say that in order for anything for a Chinese society, community to be successful in a host country, you need to have the so-called 3 pillars, right? The 3 pillars are the Chinese language school, the Chinese language media, and the Chinese business and social networks. And all of them are very important. And what concerns me, from the point of view as an academic, is the role the media plays, particularly the role the Chinese language media plays in enabling, giving visibility and exposure, a platform for the Chinese politicians. And that's, I think that's food for thought for politicians.
Sorry, Professor Fitzgerald, probably due to timing, but I would like to respond to Dr. Wong's comments about joining the Labour Party. I think it's my right to respond, but I think, like, personally for me, is the reason why I joined the Labour Party is because, certainly I believed in social change and, wanting to close the gap, to end disadvantage, and those were the fundamental values that attracted me to the Labour Party. But it doesn't really matter what party you belong in. I think coming from a culturally diverse background, you have something to offer that particular political party that others can't. And it's about that sort of diverse view that you have, the experiences you have, and the way that you've been brought up. You can bring a lot of benefit to that particular political party. For instance, that's what people say when you have, the flavour of the month is, gender equality on boards. When you have women on a board, they bring a completely diverse view. That's the same thing for multicultural communities. They bring diverse views for that particular party. So I think we as elected officials certainly have made a big impact or a small impact in whatever way we've done in our own respective political parties, but more work needs to be done, I think. So that's all I end it there.
Okay, thanks. Diversity of view, that's another interesting point that we have on the table that we should come back to. Francis, could I ask you to respond to the question?
Thank you. Before I address Professor's questions, I may just mention about the Chinese media. I think that's a very, very point that you raised. The Chinese media in Australia, I agree, like in the recent re-election, a very controversial election, we find that there's hardly any letters to the editor or editorial on the Chinese papers. I think that reflects maybe an apathy or a lack of commitment of the readers to the newspapers. But I think at the same time, we have to understand the Chinese media in Australia is in a rather precarious position. You see, following the Tiananmen Square incident, a lot of Chinese nationals came to Australia, and a lot of them found their way into the Chinese media. And as a result, the Chinese media, a lot of the people in the Chinese media, they are not earning very good wages, and a lot of the media, they are competing for in a limited, very limited market for the advertising dollar. Now, if you look at the Chinese media, how they operate, they rely a lot on the active community in the Chinese community. They act by active community, I mean the community that surfaces on the media very often, like including small businesses and community organizations and so on. The Chinese media has to work well with those communities. Now, those communities have a very good hand-in-glove relationship with the politicians. You know, they dine together, they wine together, and they're required to go and cut ribbons, and therefore, as a result, the media bodies have to work in that kind of situation, and they have to be very cautious. As a result, they take a very cautious approach when they're reporting on political issues. Now, well, I'll come back to the point about whether the Chinese politicians have been effective. The Chinese community went through a period of awakening after the 1984 Blainey's era. And suddenly people became very aware of what the Chinese community, the Chinese people should be doing, right? The Chinese-Australian Forum, used to be called the Australian Chinese Forum, came to being because at the time a lot of the Chinese organizations were rather apathetic towards politics. And so the Australian Chinese Forum began to take a keen interest, and they alerted the community into taking an active part in the society. And suddenly the community became very active in promoting politics. There's a cry about joining Chinese, pushing Chinese into politics and so on. And in fact, whereas a lot of people think that we don't get many Chinese in politics because they look down on politics and because they despise politicians. I wonder how much that is true since that era. In fact, I can see a whole host of people scrambling to gain community and political profile. And suddenly it became vogue of pushing Chinese into politics, and whereas the community itself is not quite ready for it. And I feel that scrambling or that over-eagerness to push Chinese into politics in fact has damaged the political movement in the Chinese community, because the community is really not quite ready. And you get a few politicians who somehow, through personal connections, got into politics, and there's no people backing them up. And you find that if you pay the candidates who are saying things like, vote for me because I'm Chinese, and a lot of the Chinese community, they go to functions, not like tonight. They go to political, the faces you see in a Labour Party fundraising dinner could appear again the next day in a Liberal Party fundraising dinner, and looking just as excited and just as generous. And you find that the community itself is really not quite ready for that kind of movement. And what the media can play is to play the role of an educator, to provide good information, unbiased information. The Chinese community has been very unbiased, except that they've been too cautious. I can see that some Chinese politicians do write articles today and so on. Nobody ever rebuffs them, and if they don't perform, nobody takes any notice. I think the community itself is not ready to be critical. And I think the newspaper or the media, the Chinese media, has a role to play here, in that they should have a good look at themselves, have a good look at the community, and say, look, how can I raise the political awareness? It's more important to raise the political consciousness of the community than to madly pushing some Chinese into politics. And how do we do that? And I believe the media can, for a start, begin by raising the interest of the readers, the listeners, and the viewers about what's happening in Australia, what's happening in politics. Make them take a keen interest. If the community is politically mature, the good candidates will have a better chance of getting into politics. And the community will not continue to be patronized by their party, and will not continue to be just treated as milking cows by the political party. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Francis. Marc.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd just like to emphasize, I do realize that this is basically Chinese, symposium, sort of a talk on Chinese in Australian politics, and I'd like to emphasize that Chinese come in all size, forms, and colors. And I'm one of the strange Chinese around. I'm originally from Singapore. I now live in Ashfield, and I'm on the Ashfield Municipal Council in Sydney. My mother is of Chinese descent. Actually, I'm half a Teochew. I was talking to Sally about that just now, and my father's of Indian descent, Tamil actually. So, but I do identify with the Chinese side of my family, and I do identify with the Chinese community in Sydney in this particular case. Now, with regards to Stephen's questions about effectiveness of Chinese politicians, I find it quite ironic that Stephen should ask a question, because today I realized something, actually this evening, when Dr. Peter Wong walked in. Even though we are not from, I'm a Green, I'm with the Green, Australian Greens, and I have been so for 10 years. But back in the 1990s, when Mr. Peter Wong set up the Unity Party in the lounge room of his Stratfield home, I was one of the first people there when the party was set, and I think I was number 3 member. Yeah.
So you can always come back. Okay?
I know.
We need you.
You could join the Greens.
We need you.
But you know. So basically, I think the effect of Chinese representation in politics is unfortunately still in its infancy. It has the potential to be effective. Dr. Peter Wong here is an example of this. How something that happened 10 years ago in someone's lounge room can basically spawn an interest. I went on to join another party. Henson also was in that room that day, and he went on to join the Liberal Party, and a few others as well.
Everyone.
Jeffrey, yeah, and then there's Tay Kok, who's been president of a big body over here. So there's quite a few of us, and it all basically, to a large extent, was spurred by that event 13, 14 years ago. So, like I said, it's very much in its infancy. I feel that's quite unfortunate, because I believe we've always had, over the last 100 years, some degree of Chinese representation at the political level, particularly at the state level. I believe May Kwan Tak, who was a resident of Ashfield actually, was an MLC in the late 19th century. And but despite this early venture into politics, there has been no follow-up. But I believe over the next probably decade or so, many of us from different sides of politics, and I can speak for the Greens, and I'm sure the Liberals and Labour will be pushing extremely hard to change this. So, as for the effectiveness, all I can say is let's wait and see. I believe we are going to see some major changes in the near future. With regards to barriers, now, Stephen mentioned institutional barriers. In my perception, in my experience, I believe there are clear barriers. Some of our doing, some not of our doing. One of the barriers that we have is we don't have a clear network, political network, which supports people who are capable and able to survive, which allows them to survive within political structures in the state and federal level, or for that matter, for local government level. I believe this network starting, I mentioned with Dr. Peter Wong, little links to that little network that we're creating now. It's in its infancy, but it's coming together. And also, unfortunately, the issue of foreignness, the concept of the Chinese, in this particular case, the Chinese community being identified with a foreign entity, not necessarily in a nationalistic sort of way, but in a cultural way. Not necessarily, I mean, it's possible to accept you as an Australian, yet you are different because you are seen to be culturally different. In that respect, you are different, you are seen in a foreign perspective, and that hampers, particularly when you have no political network to back you up to actually survive within political structure, whichever side of politics you come from. Now, with regards to perceptions, barriers, I believe the next step of issues perceptions. I strongly believe that despite the fact that the various Chinese communities have a strong sense of identity of who they are and where they come from, that's beyond doubt. The Chinese are very, 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 very proud of their history and the fact that they've come to Australia and they work extremely hard to establish themselves in their new country. They are still, in effect, looking to find their identity within Australian society to a large extent. So that perception, I mean, when you don't really know where you stand with regards to where you're located in the society, how do you actually put yourself forward up in, and it's quite a frightening thing to actually take political office where you actually kind of sort of, front yourself up and you open yourself to criticism and you're expected to represent a community, often in most cases not necessarily Chinese themselves. It's a strong mix of Australians and other communities. It is up to you to represent them sufficiently and in an appropriate way. So these negative perceptions from both Australian and Chinese communities prevents and discourages involvement to a large extent. Also, another aspect, unfortunately, which I come across a lot of so-called ethnic politicians. I don't think persons of not ethnic politicians, but persons of ethnic descent who go into politics usually tend to be second generation, and therefore I find that many of them are not keen to identify with ethnic communities. While they may look ethnic, they actually are quite keen to distance themselves. I don't really know why. Maybe that in their minds, there's a need, in order to be seen as Australian, one has to distance themselves from their own ethnicity. This is not something spoken, but I've seen this in action on many, many occasions, which is quite distressing. It is not necessary to reject it's not necessary to reject everything in order to become Australian. I think it's possible to marry things together. I think a certain degree of cultural hybridity is important, and I think multiculturalism actually helps foster that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marc. Now, Justin, I've left you till last. I mean, I know Justin better than I know any of the others on the panel. And I didn't want anyone to think that because of Guanxi I was giving him preferential treatment, so I'm putting him last.
Thank you. Good evening. Look, the first point I want to make, and Councillor Lowe from Monash isn't here anymore, but unlike Councillor Lowe, I've actually done a law degree and I'm actually a practicing solicitor. So I've satisfied my parents. So that's one barrier gone. And all they want me to do now is to get married, and I mean they'll be happy to let me do what I want to do. Grandchildren. That's right. In terms of, I suppose, barriers, look, when migrants first come to Australia, I think the focus is very much on survival. It's on making a living, getting your children to good schools so that they've got a good education and they've got opportunities in this new country. And so I think thinking about politics and participating in politics is a bit of a luxury for the first generation migrants. But the children of these migrants, the second generation, they've got more opportunities and they've grown up in this country. They can be more vocal about the issues. So I think, over time we will see more Australians from Asian backgrounds participate in politics, and I think we've seen that in the most recent federal election. There were a few candidates from Asian backgrounds contesting in a number of seats. I must say mostly from the Liberal side, and Li was a candidate in Cabramatta. So I think that is something that will happen in the future because you've got Asian Australians in many other professions, and they were successful in doing that. In terms of how effective Asian politicians have been in the past, look, I acknowledge those who have come before us and have been pioneers. Dr. Peter Wong, at the height of the Pauline Hanson era, Dr. Wong took action. He decided to form the Unity Party in response to Pauline Hanson, and they spoke out against Pauline Hanson when our Prime Minister wouldn't do that. And Peter Wong and other Chinese community leaders at that time spoke for our community when those of us who were younger, were too young to speak for ourselves. So I acknowledge all the pioneers who have come before us. And I just want to leave one last comment is something I heard from Senator Penny Wong, who was at the Chinese Australian Forum dinner this year, and she was saying, when she became the first Asian Australian minister, a lot of people, were really impressed, and they were really encouraged. And what she said at that dinner was the importance of being the first is not that you're the first, but that there'll be a second and a third and a fourth and so forth. And so I'm optimistic in that I think we'll see more Asian Australians participate in politics in the future.
Thanks very much to our panellists, and they've made a number of very important points. And it's interesting that many people, not just this evening, but throughout the day, have identified those particular statements by Geoffrey Blaney and by Pauline Hanson as having had a catalytic effect on people wanting to get into the political process and do something about it. I'm now going to open it to the floor, please could I ask again if you would identify yourself and try to keep it short. Yes.
Simon Chan from CAF. This question is addressed to all the councillors, but I think maybe Francis and Peter might also like to give their opinion on it. I just wonder whether any of our councillors have aspirations